Israel was in a big pickle. Anybody remember what that big pickle was that they were in? Nope. What did they refuse to do? They refused to do something big.
Listen.
Yeah. But about what specifically?
They didn't want to go in the land.
They didn't want to go in the land. What land? Cleveland?
Probably.
They refused to go in the promised land. Remember, the spies had come back with a mostly negative report, even though it wasn't much of a negative report. It was kind of good. It was the most successful infiltration of a nation ever. Nobody died. Nobody got hurt. Everybody came back, and it was all done on foot, and nobody died. So I really don't know what the spies were so worried about, except for Caleb and Joshua, because they were the only two that were like, hey, we can take this land. So they refused to go in. So God told them that it would be the younger generation who would go into the promised land, and after the older generation died out. Okay, that led to them the whole 40-year wilderness journey that we're studying right now. However, with this, understand that it is not a roadmap. Okay, we've pretty much had a roadmap until now, from when Exodus started in the book of Exodus until now. We've had a linear journey. We can throw that out of the window now. We don't have a linear journey because most of Numbers essentially begins at the beginning of the 40-year wilderness journey, and then in just a few chapters it skips to, hey, we're already there, and we're at the end. So we kind of have to pick and choose our stories, and that's why where Deuteronomy is also going to come in a little bit and help. So, where do we begin first? Well, we're beginning a place where I said we were pretty much done, and that's law. So let's pick up in Numbers chapter 15. And Sam, if you will read verses 1 through 3.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, after you enter the land I am giving you as a home, and you present to the Lord food offerings from the herd or the flock as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, whether burnt offerings or sacrifices for special vows or free will offerings or festival offerings."
Yep, you can stop right there. So, we are not studying the law, okay? We studied the law. Hannon really helped us study the law, okay? We're done with the law. We're not going over the law. However, Numbers essentially from here on out goes a little bit of law, a little bit of story. A little bit of law, a little bit of story. A little bit of law, a little bit of story. So, where there is particular laws mentioned, we are going to cover certain aspects to understand why it was written the way it was written. Now, chapter 15 is not our primary focus tonight. Chapter 16 is going to be our primary focus for a couple of weeks. But again, this is right after God had just finished telling the Israelites that they were going to have to wander the desert for 40 years until the older generation died out. And we've covered the laws of grain and drink offering, which is kind of mentioned here again. But why is it mentioned here? Well, one, it is a reminder to the Israelites that the law still applies. Even though they have essentially been barred from entering the promised land, this does not mean that, oh, well, God's abandoned us, so we're done now. We can do whatever we want. No, this is God reminding them again. I'm not done with y'all. It's just y'all are going to have to now go through this, consequence of your sin. This goes along with how people today will let the enemy, convince them when they find themselves in a rut of sinning. Well, I as well just keep on sinning because, God doesn't love me and God's tossed me aside, so I'm just going to, do whatever I want now. No, God didn't toss Israel aside. Which leads us to the key verse in this, which is when it says, when you have come to the land which you are to inhabit. Not if, not we'll see, not could be. You know, like when you were a kid and you asked your mom, it's like, can I have this video game? Or can I have this toy? I always knew if my mom said, we'll see, it ain't happening. But if she said maybe, I was like, okay, it's happening. Like that was how I knew. That was my choice word. But God says, when you come to the land which I will let you inhabit. Okay? It was going to happen. It was a promise. God had not gone back on his promises, even though Israel was now going to have to wander the desert for 40 years. Again, we have these moments when we come, when life doesn't go our way. I'm sure we've had some of those this week. Life doesn't always go our way, and we think, well, God's done with me. I get those all the time. I get in these ruts where I'm like, well, this week sucks, so maybe God doesn't love me anymore. But that's not true. God was not finished with the Israelites no more than he is finished with them today, because he's not. We know that God's not done with Israel, which, just saying, anybody, kept up with Israeli news over the weekend? What's happening over there?
Nothing good.
Yeah, nothing good. So, just saying. All right. So, we clear on that. It was just, it's, again, right here, right out of the gate, even though it, at first glance when you're reading chapter 15, it's like, oh, okay, great, it's talking about more law, blah, blah, blah. But we get a promise in this, is God is saying, when you enter the land, meaning God still had a plan for them to go into the land. Now, we're going to skip a lot of verses. Bree, will you read 37 through 41?
15?
Yep, chapter 15 still.
37 through 41?
Yep.
The Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and tell them that they shall make for themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and that they shall put on the tassel of each corner of a violet thread. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, so that you will do them and not follow your own heart and your own eyes, which led you to prostitute yourselves, so that you will remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God.
We've studied, all about circumcision being the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham that then extended to all of his descendants, which is the Israelites. A permanent mark of the flesh that also served as a reminder that Israel had a very real relationship with the one true God. However, with that all being said, we get a new detail in the law that we haven't really talked about before, I don't think, up until this point. The men were to wear 4 tassels that would serve as a constant reminder of the commandments of God, and the Israelites would wear a tassel on each corner of their clothing. You can still get these today. I did not know this, but there is a special garment you can also wear underneath your clothes. It's almost like how we wear like white t-shirts underneath like dress clothes, that has the little clips on them to clip the tassels on. Found them on Amazon. I thought it was really, really, really neat.
Those are becoming more popular.
Yes, they are. I've actually seen like people wearing them, and I was like, prayer tassels, neat. So, Deuteronomy 22:12 specifically states that they were to wear one on the square garments, or the square parts of the outer garment. Each tassel was made of blue or violet. I think the ones I saw were like it was like a color coordinate. It was like white, blue, white, blue, white, blue. And the color in it, whether it was blue or violet, represented royalty and divinity. Ultimately, these tassels served as a daily reminder of Israel's status to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, to be loyal to God alone, and as a reminder of their redemption under God. Now, keep all of that in mind in light of the story we are about to study. That's all we're going to cover in chapter 15. Two big important things is, one, God was not finished with Israel yet, and two, he had a new way of reminding them to remember God's laws and as their role as a dedicated royal priesthood. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Now, moving on to chapter 16. Hannon, will you read verses 1 through 3?
And for the sons of Izhar, the son of Korah, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Bela, sons of Reuben, took action. And they rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron, and said to them, You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?
Does anybody watch The Promised Land on YouTube? Oh my
That's the
Lord.
Office, right?
Yes, you need to watch it, because I could not read this story. Now, this is a very serious story, okay? People die in this story. But Korah is the main character of this story. I watched that entire series. Korah is a main player in that series. I could not read this story with a straight face after watching that, because it was just funny. Because you see him in the show going, oh, today Moses is going to pick the leaders of tens and of 50s and of hundreds and thousands. I know I'm going to be a leader of thousands. And then Korah comes up to Moses. He's like, hello, Moses. He's like, hello, Korah. You're a leader of 10. He goes, what? Oh, what? Anyways, just saying, watch it. It's hilarious. Okay, couple things before we dive into this. One, understand that events like this in the 40-year wilderness, we do not have an exact timeline, like I said at the beginning. There are conflicting commentaries. Some say that this story took place when Moses was told by God to select Aaron as high priest. However, the majority of commentators, and because of evidence provided in verses 13 and 14 that we'll read later, this story takes place sometime in the 40-year wandering. And it was probably closer at the beginning of the 40-year wandering than it was later. 2. First 5 books cover very real history. And this is something I've said, and I think this is something also Hannon has said before too, that the first 5 books have a rhythmic tone to them. There is a level of poetry. So when you have stories like this, they're placed also with other stories to help provide context. Just like when we studied chapters 11 and 12, how it went through a cycle of 3 complaints, 3 judgments, and 3 repentances. Okay, so you had like a cycle of 3 there. So just keep that in mind of like, oh, well, why was it put here? And they just picked and choose. Because some people will say, oh, well, the Bible can't be real because they just picked and choose where to put stories. Like, no, there was a reason for Moses' writing the way he did. And again, this all had to do, kind of a short answer for that, is it had to do with, again, their oral tradition of how they would memorize stories. This helped with the reminders, so that way they didn't forget this stuff. So that way it got passed down through the generations. So this story probably more than likely happened at the beginning of the 40-year wilderness. As Exodus carries no real story of rebellion against Aaron for being the high priest. If anything, we have the story in Exodus of Moses getting mad at Aaron because of the whole golden calf story. So, who was Korah? Korah was who the Kohathanites were named after, which was a sect of Levites who were given the roles to carry the items of the temple. And Korah makes a alliance with 3 tribal leaders from the clan of Reuben. They also get an additional 250 people to support them in this rebellion. Now, this rebellion has very selfish reasoning behind it. Korah seems to, in this story, not like his position in the tribe of Levi and their job title of taking care of and carrying the, vestments for the temple. So the real reasoning behind this is he's trying to elevate himself to a new position. He tells Moses and Aaron that the entire nation of Hebrews were all holy and that Moses and Aaron was nobody special. Okay? Now, I want y'all to be thinking about this because I'm going to ask y'all in a minute. But why were Moses and Aaron so special? If someone will read verse 4 of chapter 16.
And when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face. Just 4?
Yep, just 4. So again, keep in mind, what made Moses and Aaron special? All right, just keep that question in your mind. In light of the law given in verse 15, okay, at the end there, when we read about these tassels and how the men would wear them as a sign of being surrounded by God's law, and how, God is essentially telling them that, you're a royal priesthood, this whole nation. Korah uses this toward his argument. Exodus 19:6 says, "You will be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words that the Lord said to the Hebrews after leading them out of Egypt. These are now the words that Korah is using to go up against Moses' leadership and Aaron's role as high priest. Lee, will you look up 1 Peter 2:9 and read it? And Kayla, will you look up Isaiah 42:6? 1 Peter 2:9 and Isaiah 42:6. And Lily, if you'll read first.
But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light.
So, likewise, Peter said similar words. Now, Peter was, talking to Jews who were Christian, who were living in a Gentile land. But this idea can be applied also to Christians today, that we are partakers in a royal priesthood. Keep that in mind. We read Isaiah 42:6. Okay.
It helped everyone, his neighbor, and everyone said to his brother, "Be of good courage." Oh, no, sorry, this is 41.
I was about to say, wait.
I'm so sorry.
You good?
I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles.
So, how was Israel, again, just working through this logically, they had in their nation a clan of priests, the Levites. So how were they as a people supposed to be metaphorically, a royal priesthood? Isaiah 42:6 answers that. They were called to be a light to point the direction to the Gentiles toward God. Okay? I love what our Sunday school teacher, Monty, calls it. He says that God gave Israel a megaphone. And then he took that megaphone away and he gave it to the church. And then one day he's going to take that megaphone away from the church and give it back to Israel. Sadly, as we know, the Jewish nation being a light to the Gentiles did not happen. Not the way it was supposed to. Why? Because God gave us free will. Okay? He didn't make us like robots. Just like what we, have talked about so far. We've talked about the idea of habitual sin cycles and stuff like that. Seasons of trial and tribulation. Repentance is not, really exclusive to our world today. Israel shows how merciful God can be. Okay, because they're still around. That's the real big stories that if you could take anything from the Old Testament, all right, because a lot of people inside Christian circles as well try to not have anything to do with the Old Testament. Me and Hannon hate that. But if you take anything from the Old Testament, it is that God is patient and merciful. And like we taught the kids this week in Sunday school, God is long-suffering. He has long-suffering love, which means it is very patient. But, and again, this idea of being the royal priesthood and how the Jews were to be a light to the Gentiles, now what does that look like today? Emma, will you read Matthew 28, 19 and 20?
Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world.
What do we call this, guys? What is that called? What house were you in again? 10 points to Gryffindor. The Great Commission. Jesus gave illustration of how the gospel the gospel message is a message to the world of redemption, and how we now are supposed to be that light to the world. How we are supposed to share the gospel and how we are supposed to point people to the Messiah. So, I bring all this up because Korah, in his comments about how Israel is a royal priesthood, okay, understand that is a metaphor, okay? As a nation holy, they were supposed to point the way to Christ. That does not mean that everybody in the nation was a Levite and supposed to be a priest. Just as believers today, we all have the responsibility of sharing Christ, even though we're not all pastors. I know, that's like a revolutionary idea. You mean you can share the gospel and not be a preacher? Yes. You don't even have to be a missionary. However, Korah was being as selfish as the devil was when he tried to usurp God's throne.
Like that time in the Garden of Eden.
He wasn't concerned about Israel, or even with thinking Moses and Aaron were being too powerful. Yes, he was using the excuse of, you're abusing your authority. But all he really wanted was a position for himself. Pride was the only intent. Sam, I'm going to come back to you. Will you read verses 8 and 9? And then Bree, if you'll read 10 and 11 in chapter 16.
Is it 8 and 9?
Yep.
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Moses also said to Korah, "Now listen, you Levites. Isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work of the Lord's tabernacle? and to stand before the community and minister to them.
And that he has brought you your Korah and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you.
Oop. We got a dog accident. Oh no.
Poor little dog.
I'm good at catching them.
And then he has brought you your Korah and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you. But are you seeking the priesthood as well? Therefore, you and your whole group are the ones gathered together against the Lord. But as for Aaron, who is he that you grumble against him?
Intercession. Do.
I'm gonna get a track bag.
They're under there, right behind where Lee is. What do, dog? Yep, they're right. There you go. All right. You want me to keep going?
Thursday for me.
Okay. So, with everything that you two girls just read, all right. Again, Moses has presented himself now on bent knee, begging the people not to rebel. All right. Now, howbeit this is a smaller rebellion than what happened last time, because last time the rebellion was almost the entire congregation, as it says, of Israel. But Moses snaps back. He tells Korah, isn't your position enough? God has blessed you and your house to carry the sacred instruments and vestments of the temple. God has separated you for a special purpose. God has brought you to a position that brings you close to Him. This screams the echoes of Satan's pride when he desired to be above God. He wouldn't accept God's rule. And now we have Korah here who would not accept what God had called him to do. Moses was the anointed leader, Aaron the anointed high priest. But that wasn't enough for these 200 plus men who were going against them. So, what can we learn from this? Kayla, will you look up Hebrews 13:17, and Lee, will you look up James 3:1? Hebrews 13:17 and James 3:1.
Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls as they must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you.
So this is talking about Christian leaders, all right? If they are following God's calling in their life, if they are doing that calling justice, they deserve the loyalty of their church as ministers. And Lee, if you'll read James 3:1.
My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation.
And this is the other side of that. If you are a leader in a church, a teacher, a preacher, whatever position that God has appointed you to, Scriptures is telling them, You're held to a higher standard. That's why not everybody becomes a teacher. Anyone can have a title. Oh, look at me, I'm a Sunday school teacher. Look at me, I'm a preacher. Oh, I'm an evangelist. Oh, I'm a prophet. Oh, I'm an apostle. Anybody can have a title. You can slap a title on anything. But if a person hasn't been called by God, it's an issue.
If anyone calls himself an apostle, just ignore them.
Moses was called, and this goes. Let me ask y'all real quick. Why was Moses and Aaron a big deal? What do y'all think?
What are you asking?
Why was Moses and Aaron such a big deal? Why was Korah having such a hard time with this?
Sounds like, well, I think he was having a hard time because of pride.
Okay.
And they're a big deal because God called them.
God called them. They were appointed. Well, they were called, appointed, and anointed to their roles.
A lot of people hate that.
And they proved their roles over and over and over again. What made Moses qualified for the position?
God.
Nothing. Nothing. Moses didn't even want it. What did Moses say when God called him at the burning bush?
Not you.
Somebody else.
I'm not good enough. I'm not a good talker. They won't listen to me. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. He hated speaking in front of people. Moses wanted to just keep living his life as a shepherd under his father-in-law. But God doesn't call the qualified. He calls those who he wants, and then he does what with them? It's an E word. He equips them. Equips. He equips them.
Also, if he didn't pick Moses, who was not enslaved in Egypt, to go get them, like he couldn't call one of the people already there. He had to call someone outside of them to go get
Moses would
them.
actually, the Egyptian the Pharaoh might actually have an ear.
And yes, Moses did have the previous, again, he was somebody in Pharaoh's house. We don't exactly know what that was. If you go with the Disney version, Prince of Egypt, but
For the same reason, like Joseph was placed in his position
Yeah.
to be able to provide for his family later. Like it's all.
But even further, taking it for us today, the leaders who founded our church, and by church I mean the universal church, Peter, John, James, Andrew, Bartholomew, half of them weren't educated, most of them were fishermen. They at best had a little bit of Hebrew schooling, and that's it. And God called them to do the most amazing thing ever, saying that you will do works even greater than I. And we all know the works that Jesus did. However, we need to be careful in our world today. Whether you're a leader or a follower, we all have a role to play. Moses was right in putting Korah in his place. He wanted to elevate himself to a better position, and all this was sinful pride. This is what led to this rebellion. And it was righteous anger and godly correction that led Moses to his snapback. This wasn't a great start for Israel in its 40-year journey, bending that they literally just left one rebellion and hopped right into another one. Again, they only had 260 people in this rebellion, versus the 2 million people that Israel was at this point. But still, not a great way. And we're going to get more into this next week. But again, one final thought I had in all of this is if you are in a church and want to become a leader within the church, you need to pray on it and ask yourself if you're doing this for God or are you doing it for yourself. Are you wanting to become a preacher because it sounds really cool, because everybody listens to you? Or do you want to be a preacher because you want to be able to spread the word of God? Do you want to be a Sunday school teacher to just get another check mark and make, I don't know, you really want Linda to think you're cool? Everybody knows a Linda. But if you're already a leader, this is a good way to evaluate yourself. Again, am I doing this for God or am I doing this for myself? Because sadly, especially in American churches, we have a lot of people who they may have started with the right reasons, but they end up becoming corrupted. And if you feel like this is you and feel like your heart is not aligned right now with God's purposes, maybe stepping away would be a good idea. And if you're in church and you think to yourself, boy, I really don't like this teacher, or I don't like this preacher, and I think they should be doing a better job, and you're sitting there in the worship service critiquing everything the preacher is saying, now again, if it's unbiblical, critique it all you want. But if you're sitting there and all you're thinking of is, I can do a better job, maybe it's the enemy trying to take the words that are being planted away from you. Questions, comments, confusions about this? I know we didn't get a lot through this story, but as I was reading this, all the other stuff just hit me like a ton of bricks about how this echoes how churches are today. You have it does. It very much like the echoes the fall of Satan. This is also going to echo something really big that I've got planned for later, and it's just so good. But I don't want to spoil nothing. All right. So, next week we will get more into Korah's rebellion when we will discuss the 2 tests that come up in this section. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to comment down below. If you have any prayer requests, please feel free to reach out. You can comment them down below. If I don't see anything, I'll probably ask to see if anybody has any prayer requests later on in the week. But feel free to, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and share as we're trying to grow the channel. And if you need to reach us, you can always reach us at guardiansofchristministries@gmail.com. God bless and have a wonderful week.